Welcome, seekers of the past, to Dark History, the channel where the shadows of forgotten civilizations come alive. Today, we journey into the rugged highlands of ancient Armenia, a land of towering mountains, deep valleys, and rivers that have witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms. Here, kings and warriors once ruled with courage, monasteries were carved into cliffs as havens of faith, and a people's spirit endured through fire, invasion, and exile. From the earliest Urartian fortresses to the Bagratid revival, from the Kingdom of Cilicia to the silent endurance of Armenians in diaspora, this is a story of survival against empires, of faith preserved in stone, and of culture that refused to vanish. We will uncover the mysteries of ancient cities, the legacy of kings and queens, the battles fought to defend faith and freedom, and the enduring presence of the eternal mountain, Ararat, watching over the land. If you wish to explore these hidden histories and the untold stories of civilizations lost to time, make sure to subscribe to Dark History and hit the bell icon so you never miss our daily journeys into the shadows of the past. Now, let us step quietly into the mountains, monasteries, and the legends of ancient Armenia, and listen to the whispers of time. Chapter 1. The Land of Ararat. The wind moves slowly across the mountains. It gathers in the valleys, whispers through the grass, and coils like a serpent along the cliffs. The peaks rise sharp against the horizon, their crowns sometimes lost in snow, sometimes wreathed in cloud. This is the land that gave birth to legends, a place where the sky seems to lean close to the earth, and where memory itself is carved into stone. This is Armenia, ancient, mysterious, and eternal. A land between worlds. To understand Armenia, one must first see its geography. It is not a flat plain, not an easy stretch of fertile earth. It is a highland, a fortress of mountains, ridges, and valleys. Here, the Armenian plateau rises between the great empires of the ancient world. To the south, Mesopotamia, cradle of civilization. To the west, Anatolia, land of Hittites and Greeks. To the east, Persia, with its kings and satraps. To the north, the steppes, where horse-borne nomads thundered across the grass. Armenia stood at the crossroads, never hidden, never secure. It was a shield and a target, a land that empires wanted but could never fully tame. Its mountains made it strong, its valleys made it fertile, and its people endured between giants. The land of Ararat was more than territory. It was a stage where history repeated itself, each empire leaving a mark, each war carving scars into the stone. And through it all, the Armenians remained stubborn, rooted like the mountains themselves. Mount Ararat, sacred and eternal at the heart of this land, rises a mountain so great, so majestic, that it dominates not only the landscape, but the imagination. Mount Ararat, its peak soars into the heavens, crowned in ice, often hidden in cloud. For Armenians, it is more than a mountain. It is a symbol, a guardian, a presence that watches over the land. Legends say it was here that Noah's Ark came to rest after the flood. For generations, pilgrims and wanderers have looked at Ararat and felt both awe and reverence. Even when borders shifted, even when empires ruled from afar, Ararat remained the heart. It is a mountain of memory, sacred to a people, eternal in its silence. At dawn, when the first light strikes its snowy peak, it glows like fire. At dusk, it sinks into shadow, vast and immovable. Rivers of life from these highlands flow, rivers that gave life to civilizations. The Euphrates and Tigris rise from Armenian soil, carrying water and fertility down into Mesopotamia. The Araxes and Kura carve valleys through the plateau, nourishing the fields and vineyards. Armenia was never isolated. Its rivers connected it to the world. Traders, armies, and migrants followed these waters, bringing goods and ideas, but also war and conquest. To live in Armenia was to live both at the center of the world and on the edge of danger, a land of stone and fortress. The geography shaped the people. Villages clung to hillsides. Fortresses rose on rocky cliffs. Temples and tombs were built from heavy stone, designed not only for worship, but for survival. Travelers wrote of Armenia as a rugged land, harsh but beautiful. Its mountains were both shield and prison. To outsiders, it was a land difficult to conquer. To its people, it was home and worth defending against any invader. Even today, standing among the ruins of ancient fortresses, one feels the echo of this resilience. Stones weathered by centuries of wind still hold their shape, silent witnesses to wars and kingdoms long gone. Myths of origins before kingdoms. Before history written on tablets, there were myths. The Armenians traced their ancestry to Haik, a legendary patriarch who fought against Babylonian oppressors and founded the nation. His victory was said to mark the independence of Armenia, and his name gave the Armenians their endonym, Hay. Mountains and myths were inseparable. The land itself seemed to tell stories, gods dwelling on peaks, spirits hidden in valleys, sacred groves where offerings were made. To the ancient Armenians, their plateau was alive, infused with divinity and danger, a crossroads of empires. But the land of Ararat was never alone. To the south lay Assyria and Babylon, powerful, relentless. To the east rose Persia, with its vast armies and fire temples. To the west, Anatolia, and, later, Rome. Armenia's fate was shaped not only by its own people, but by its neighbors, who sought to control its passes, its trade routes, its fertile valleys. Sometimes Armenia was a buffer, sometimes a battleground, sometimes an empire in its own right. But always, it was caught between powers greater in number and wealth, yet rarely greater in endurance. Eternal landscape. Close your eyes and imagine the plateau at dusk. The air cools quickly as the sun sinks. Behind the ridges, a shepherd drives his flock across a stony path, the sound of bells echoing faintly. In the distance, the peak of Ararat glows red before fading into black. The rivers glimmer faintly in the twilight. The wind carries the scent of earth and stone. This is the land of Ararat, a place where mountains guard memory, where rivers carry life, and where history lingers like a shadow. It is here, in this harsh yet sacred landscape, that Armenia was born. Its future, glorious, tragic, and eternal, begins with the land itself. Chapter 2. The First Kingdoms. The mountains do not yield their secrets easily. They keep them hidden in valleys, in caves, in stones carved with half-forgotten signs. Long before the word Armenia was spoken, before dynasties rose, there were tribes scattered across these highlands. They farmed, they hunted, they raised cattle in narrow valleys, and they looked to the mountains as both sanctuary and challenge. Out of these scattered clans, the first kingdoms would be born. The roots of civilization. Armenia's story does not begin with empire, but with survival. In the fertile valleys watered by the Euphrates and the Araxes, early peoples planted grain, domesticated animals, and built simple homes of mud, brick, and stone. Archaeological sites like Shirak, Areni, and Metsamor whisper of lives lived thousands of years ago. From the caves of Areni came discoveries of ancient wine jars, some of the oldest evidence of winemaking in the world. In these cool caverns, clay vessels preserved the liquid that connected ritual and survival. To drink wine was not only to live but to commune with gods and ancestors. Even in these earliest days, Armenia's culture was being shaped by the land, the vine, and the mountain, metallurgy, and fire by the Bronze Age. The tribes of the Armenian plateau had learned the secrets of fire and metal. They smelted copper and later bronze, forging tools, weapons, and ornaments. Mines opened in the hills, and blacksmiths fed their fires with the wood of mountain forests. Metsamor became one of the region's oldest industrial centers, where furnaces glowed and metal workers hammered bronze into blades and jewelry. Ruins of the site reveal not only industry but also spirituality, astronomical carvings on stones, aligned with the stars, suggest that these early peoples saw the cosmos as a guide to their destiny. The mastery of fire gave strength to the tribes, but it also invited war. With stronger weapons came the power to conquer, and so, scattered clans began to form alliances, chiefs rose as kings, and the first kingdoms began to take shape. The Kingdom of Ararat Legans, tell of Ararat, a kingdom said to exist in these highlands, remembered in Sumerian poems. Though historians still debate its exact location, the name lingers in the echoes of the land. In Mesopotamian myths, Ararat was a place of great wealth, where gold and lapis lazuli shone, and where temples were built with sacred skill. Whether real or myth, Ararat became part of Armenia's shadowed ancestry, a memory of a kingdom both mysterious and powerful. Between giants as the tribes grew, so too did the empires beyond their borders. To the south, Sumer and Akkad, later Babylon and Assyria. The Armenian highlands stood as both frontier and prize. Armies marched through its passes, seeking to control trade routes that linked Mesopotamia with Anatolia and beyond. The tribes resisted but also traded. They offered metal, cattle, wine, and stone. In return came ideas, gods, and written symbols. The Armenian plateau was never isolated. It was always part of the larger world, always absorbing and reshaping influences from beyond. Petroglyphs of the ancestors on the stones of Otosur and Gagama, ancient carvings remain. Petroglyphs scratched into rock depict hunters, animals, and mysterious symbols. Some show solar signs, some show processions of figures. These carvings are among the oldest voices of Armenia, silent now, but still speaking through their images. The people who carved them lived before kings and empires, yet their art shows a sense of the divine, of connection to the stars, of the mysteries of life and death. Their world was harsh, but it was not without beauty, imagination, and meaning. The first kings by the second millennium BCE, Armenia's scattered tribes were consolidating under leaders who styled themselves as kings. Small polities rose across the plateau, often warring with each other, often resisting the ambitions of Mesopotamian empires. Names are few, fragments of inscriptions survive, but the pattern is clear. Armenia was becoming more than a land of tribes. It was becoming a land of kingdoms. Some scholars connect these early states to the Hayasazi Confederation, mentioned in Hittite records. These were warrior peoples, resisting Hittite expansion, raiding and defending their mountain homes. The Hittites called them fierce and stubborn, a trait that would echo through Armenian history again and again. Life in the early kingdoms. What was life like for these first Armenians? Imagine a village beneath a mountain ridge, houses of stone and clay clustered together, fires glowing inside as families share bread and wine, shepherds guiding flocks across hillsides, hunters bringing back game from the forests, women weaving cloth from wool, children learning the stories of gods and ancestors. Temples, though simple, stood at the heart of these communities. Offerings of bread, wine, and animals were made to spirits of the mountains, the sun, and the rivers. Every harvest, every hunt, was a ritual, every act of survival, an act of faith. The coming of Urartu's first kingdoms laid the foundation for what was to come. From their traditions of metalworking, warfare, and worship, the great kingdom of Urartu would emerge, stronger, more centralized, and more ambitious than its predecessors. Urartu would rise like a fortress of stone in the highlands, challenging even the mighty Assyrians. But before that age, Armenia's roots remained in these scattered polities, small yet enduring, fragile yet unbroken, shaping the culture, faith, and resilience of a people who would endure for millennia. Closing reflections. As night falls on the plateau, the stars emerge above the mountains. Somewhere in a valley, A fire flickers in a small settlement. Families gather close, telling stories of ancestors, watching the shadows play against the walls. Beyond the fire's glow lies darkness, filled with the cry of wolves, the rush of rivers, the silent weight of the mountains. In that darkness the first kingdoms lived, dreamed, and died. Their ruins are faint, their names mostly forgotten. But their spirit lives on, in the stones, in the myths, and in the blood of Armenia. They were the first flickers of a flame that would burn through history. Chapter 3. Urartu. Fortress of stone, the mountains are ancient walls. They rise like sentinels, their ridges sharp, their valleys deep, their silence heavy. In these highlands, stone was more than earth. It was protection, it was foundation, it was destiny. Out of the scattered tribes and fragile kingdoms of old, there emerged a new power, forged in stone, hardened by war, and remembered as one of the greatest kingdoms of the ancient Near East. Its name was Urartu, the birth of a kingdom around the 9th century BCE. A new kingdom rose in the Armenian highlands, known to the Assyrians as Urartu, and to its own people as the land of Bianelli. This state was not just a collection of tribes. It was a kingdom built with intention, organization, and vision. Its kings unified scattered peoples, built fortresses on mountains, and created one of the most formidable powers of the region. Urartu would rival Assyria, challenge Babylon, and etch its name into the chronicles of the ancient world. A land of fortresses. One image defines Urartu. It is the fortress. From stone and brick, they built mighty citadels on mountain ridges and hilltops. Their walls rose high, their towers overlooked valleys, their gates guarded by soldiers clad in bronze. The ruins of Erebuni, near modern Yerevan, still stand as testimony. Founded by King Argishti the First in 782 BCE, Erebuni was both fortress and city. Its walls enclosed temples, palaces, and storerooms. Its murals glowed with color, red, blue, and black, depicting gods, warriors, and sacred animals. These fortresses were more than defense. They were symbols of power, centers of administration, hubs of culture. They proclaimed to every tribe and every enemy, "This is Urartu, strong, enduring, carved in stone." Kings of Urartu Mong, the rulers of Urartu, names echo through history. Sardarii, who founded the dynasty. Ishpuni, who expanded its lands. Menua, who built canals and fortresses. Argishtii, who created cities like Erebun. And Rusai, who clashed with Assyria. Each king carved inscriptions into stone, recording victories, building projects, and devotion to the gods. These inscriptions remain, weathered but legible. Fragments of a voice from 3,000 years ago. Urartu was not only about war. Its kings were builders, administrators, and visionaries. They sought not only conquest, but stability, a kingdom that would last. The gods of Urartu bound Urartu together. At the head of their pantheon stood Haldi, the war god, often depicted upon a lion. His temples stood in fortresses, his name invoked before battles, his strength believed to guide the kingdom's victories. Alongside him were Teshiba, the storm god, and Shavini, the sun god. These deities represented not only natural forces, but the endurance of the state itself. In every fortress, temples rose to honor them, sacrifices were made, and priests kept the sacred fires burning. The people of Urartu believed their kingdom was protected by divine power. To rebel against the king was to rebel against the gods. To fight for Urartu was to fight under the gaze of Haldi himself. The power of Urartu's greatness was not only in its fortresses and gods, but in its mastery of water. The highlands are rugged, their rivers swift, their rains uncertain. To thrive here required engineering. The kings of Urartu built canals and irrigation systems that carried water across valleys and into fields. The Menua Canal, stretching more than 50 kilometers, still flows today, a living relic of Urartian skill. With water, the kingdom fed its people, sustained its armies, and expanded its cities, in a land of stone. Water was life, and Urartu controlled it with genius. Conflict with Assyrian kingdom rises without rivals. For Urartu, the greatest enemy was Assyria. To the south, the Assyrian kings watched uneasily as Urartu grew stronger, its fortresses rising, its armies marching. War was inevitable. Armies clashed in the mountains, fortresses were besieged, villages burned. Assyrian annals speak of campaigns against Urartu, of victories and destruction. But Urartu endured. Time and again, they rebuilt their fortresses, regrouped their armies, and fought back. For nearly 2 centuries, Urartu stood as Assyria's northern rival, defying the empire that had crushed so many others. The people of Urartu were the people behind the walls. Farmers tilled fields beneath the watch of fortresses. Shepherds drove flocks through mountain valleys. Craftsmen forged weapons, carved stone, and painted murals. Women wove cloth, baked bread, and tended vineyards. Children played in the shadow of citadel walls. Growing up in a kingdom where war was always near, life in Urartu was both harsh and vibrant. The mountains demanded resilience, the kingdom demanded loyalty, and the gods demanded devotion. To be Urartian was to live with strength, endurance, and faith. The fall of Urartu, even stone can crumble. In the late 7th century BC, Urartu faced not only Assyria, but new invaders, the Scythians, nomadic horsemen sweeping from the steppes. The kingdom, weakened by constant war, began to fracture. Fortresses fell, cities burned, kings vanished from the record by the 6th century BCE. Urartu was gone. In its place, new powers rose, and Armenia, as a distinct identity, began to emerge. But Urartu was not forgotten. Its fortresses, its canals, its inscriptions remained, whispering of a kingdom of stone, legacy of stone today. Standing among the ruins of Erebuni, or the walls of Tushpa, one feels the silence of centuries. The stones are weathered, the murals faded, but the presence remains. Urartu was a kingdom that dared to challenge giants, that carved its will into the mountains, that left behind monuments strong enough to endure 3,000 years. It was a fortress kingdom, born of stone, ruled by gods, sustained by water, and remembered in shadows. Closing reflections. Night falls on the Armenian plateau. The wind moves across the ruins of an ancient citadel. Once, soldiers patrolled these walls, priests lit sacred fires, kings gave orders from their thrones. Now only silence remains, broken by the cry of an owl and the rustle of the wind. But, if you listen closely, the stones still speak. They tell of Urartu, the fortress of stone, the rival of Assyria, the ancestor of Armenia, a kingdom long fallen, yet still alive in memory, still carved into the mountains that birthed it. Chapter 4. The birth of Armenia. The kingdom of Urartu had fallen. Its fortresses lay in ruin, its inscriptions silent, its kings gone, yet the land itself endured, the mountains remained, the rivers still flowed. And in the echoes of your fall, a new identity began to rise, one that would carry the highlands into a new chapter of history. From the stones of Urartu, from the myths of Hike, from the struggles of tribes and warriors, there was born a people who would call themselves Armenians. Out of the ashes when Urartu collapsed in the late 7th century BCE, it left behind more than ruins. Its canals still flowed, its fortresses still stood in part, its gods still lingered in memory. But into this space came new tribes and peoples. Among them were the Hayasazi descendants and the Armon, Indo-European tribes who had long been present in the region. The fusion of Urartian culture with Indo-European traditions created something new. It was not merely a continuation, nor a complete break. It was a transformation, the birth of Armenia, as a distinct nation, with its own language, its own culture, its own destiny. The patriarch Haikat, the heart of Armenia's self-image, was a myth, the story of Haik, the legendary forefather. According to tradition, Haik was a mighty warrior who fled Babylon's tyranny and led his people north into the mountains. There, he faced the Babylonian giant Bel in battle and struck him down with an arrow. That victory marked the independence of the Armenian people, and from Haik's name came their identity. They called themselves Hay, and their land Hyastin. Whether myth or memory, the story of Haik shaped Armenia's soul. It was a declaration of independence, of resilience, of defiance against empires. It told Armenians that they were not born from conquest, but from resistance. Language and identity. As Urartu faded, the Armenian language began to emerge more clearly. Belonging to the Indo-European family, it carried both native traditions and influences from neighboring cultures. Over centuries, it would evolve into one of the world's most unique tongues, holding within it the memory of mountains, rivers, and ancestors. Language bound the people together. In villages, in valleys, in the shadow of ruined fortresses, the Armenians spoke, sang, and prayed in their own tongue. Through language, they preserved memory and forged identity. A land of transition, the Armenian plateau was never isolated. After Urartu, new powers rose, the Medes, the Persians, and later the mighty empire of Alexander the Great. Armenia lay in the path of conquerors, yet it did not vanish. Instead, it adapted, absorbing influences while maintaining its own essence. Armenia's position at the crossroads meant it could never be entirely free of outside forces, but it also meant it was never fully conquered in spirit. Each empire left a mark, but Armenia remained Armenia. The rise of dynasties. By the 6th century BCE, Armenia was ruled by local dynasties who traced their roots to both Urartu and the legendary Haik. The Urartian dynasty emerged as one of the first recognized royal houses, ruling under the shadow of Persia. Though subject to the Achaemenid kings, the Urartians maintained Armenian traditions, building fortresses, minting coins, and governing their people in the highlands. They were kings in their own right, even as they acknowledged greater empires. Between freedom and empire, Armenia's story after Urartu was one of balance. Too weak to dominate the great empires, too strong to be erased, Armenia survived by shifting, adapting, resisting when possible, yielding when necessary. This balance would define its history for centuries, a kingdom at the crossroads, often divided, often pressured, yet never destroyed. The shadow of Ararat. Through all these changes, one constant remained: Mount Ararat. To the Armenians, it was not just a mountain, it was their heart, their origin, their eternal witness. Even as rulers changed and empires rose and fell, Ararat remained the silent guardian of Armenian identity. Its snowy peak became the symbol of endurance, lofty, immovable, eternal. Cultural memory. Though Urartu was gone, Armenians remembered. They preserved its fortresses, repurposed its canals, and inherited its resilience. The new culture of Armenia was not born from nothing, it was born from memory, stone, and struggle. And so, as the first millennium BCE unfolded, Armenia took its place on the stage of history. No longer just a land of tribes or the ruins of Urartu, but a people with a name, a myth, and a destiny. Closing reflections. Imagine the plateau at dawn. The ruins of Urartian fortresses rise dark against the lightning sky. Villagers move among them, herding flocks, tending fields, speaking in the language of Hay. In their hearts lives the story of Haik, the shadow of Ararat, the endurance of their ancestors. From this moment, Armenia is born. Out of ashes, out of myth, out of struggle, a nation begins its long and difficult journey. It is the birth of a people who would endure empire after empire, war after war, exile after exile. and still remain. Armenians, children of the mountains, guardians of Ararat. Chapter 5. Dynasties of Blood and Stone. The mountains remember kings. Their thrones crumble, their palaces fall, but their names linger in echoes carved on stone and whispered in chronicles. Armenia, newly born from the ashes of Urartu, entered an age of dynasties, rulers who fought for survival, for glory, and for the fragile thread of independence. These were kings of blood and stone, guardians of a land both blessed and cursed by its position at the crossroads of empires. The Urartu line, the first dynasty to rise in Armenia after Urartu, was the Urantids, known in Armenian as the Urvanduna. Their rule began in the 6th century BCE, under the shadow of Persia's Achaemenid Empire. Though vassals of the Persian kings, the Urantids maintained their identity, ruling from fortresses in the highlands, commanding armies of their own, and overseeing the daily lives of their people. The Urantids walked a dangerous line. To defy Persia was impossible, but to serve too faithfully risked losing Armenian soul. And so they balanced acknowledging Persian overlords while preserving Armenian traditions and court, worship, and law. Kings in the mountains. The Urartid kings were not rulers of vast empires. Their lands were rugged, their resources limited, compared to Persia's wealth. But what they lacked in size, they gained in endurance. From their mountain fortresses, they governed valleys, collected tribute, and led warriors into battle when called upon by the Persian great king. When Alexander the Great swept through Persia in the 4th century BCE, Armenia did not vanish. The Urartid rulers shifted allegiance, now serving the Macedonian conqueror, then his successors, the Seleucids. Through each change of empire, the Armenian dynasty survived, a stone unbroken in the river's current, blood on the throne yet. Dynasties are rarely peaceful. The Urartid line faced not only foreign pressure, but internal strife. Brothers turned against brothers, cousins against cousins, each claiming the throne by right of blood. In Armenia, as elsewhere, power was not given, it was seized, often in blood. The throne was never secure. Even when one king ruled, rivals watched from shadowed fortresses, waiting for weakness. Betrayal was as common as loyalty, ambition as strong as faith. Dynasties in Armenia were carved as much in blood as in stone. The art of survival. Despite this turbulence, Armenia endured. The Urantids mastered the art of survival. They bent to Persia, then to Alexander, then to the Seleucids, but they never disappeared. In their courts, Armenian nobles still feasted, priests still offered sacrifice, and warriors still swore oaths beneath the gaze of Ararat to be an Armenian. King was not to command endless riches or armies beyond number. It was to endure, to keep the land alive between empires that sought to swallow it whole. The rise of the Artaxiad dynasty in the 2nd century BCE. A new dynasty emerged, the Artaxias, founded by Artaxias I. This line claimed independence from the Seleucids and began to build a stronger, more centralized kingdom. Artaxias established new borders, minted coins with his image, and founded cities, including Artaxiada, which became a royal capital. With the Artaxiad, Armenia's ambitions grew. No longer content to merely survive, they sought to expand, to claim glory, to make Armenia a force in the ancient world. Kings and conquerors, the Artaxiad ruled during a turbulent era. Rome was rising to power in the west, Parthia in the east. Armenia stood between them, its kings forced to choose allies carefully, to shift loyalties swiftly, to fight when no choice remained. This was an age of warrior kings, of battles fought in valleys and mountains, of treaties sealed and broken. Blood flowed across the land, but through it all, the dynasty endured, carving its legacy into stone and history. The stones of power, what remains of these dynasties today, are ruins and inscriptions, coins bearing the faces of kings, fortresses crumbling on cliffs, carved stones that once marked boundaries and victories. Each dynasty left behind fragments, not enough to tell the whole story, but enough to know that Armenia was never merely a province, never merely a prize. It was a kingdom with kings, with dynasties, with bloodlines that stretched across centuries. Legacy of the early dynasties. The Urantids taught survival. The Artaxid taught ambition. Together, they shaped Armenia into a land that would not only endure but seek greatness. Out of their struggles came a kingdom capable of producing rulers like Tigranes the Great, whose reign would mark Armenia's golden age. But before that glory, Armenia remained a land of fragile thrones, shifting alliances, and rulers who carved their power in blood and stone. Closing reflections. Nightfalls over a ruined fortress. The stones are cold, the halls silent, but once they rang with feasts and councils, with the voices of kings and the clash of ambition. The dynasty is gone, the throne empty, but the land remembers. For Armenia, dynasties rose and fell like the turning of seasons. Each left its mark, each added a layer of memory, and in that memory, the Armenian spirit endured, waiting for the day when the land would rise, not just to survive, but to shine. Chapter 6. Armenia, Between Empires. The mountains do not choose sides. They stand silent as empires march, as banners rise and fall, as kings fight and die. But Armenia, cradled within those mountains, could never escape the struggle of empires. For centuries, it was caught between giants, Persia to the east, Rome to the west, and others who came and went. Each empire sought Armenia, each warred over it, and yet the land remained, enduring like the stone that shaped it. A land of crossroads, the Armenian plateau was both shield and prize. Its mountains protected it, its valleys nourished it, and its location made it invaluable. Whoever held Armenia controlled the routes between Asia and Europe, between Persia and the Mediterranean. Caravans passed through, armies marched through, ideas spread through. Armenia was never peripheral. It was the heart of crossroads, but that heart was always under threat. No empire could ignore Armenia, and no Armenian king could ignore the empires. Survival meant constant negotiation, shifting loyalties, and at times, outright war. Under Persian shadow in the early centuries, Armenia lay beneath the shadow of Persia. Under the Achaemenids, Armenia was a satrapy, a province ruled by local kings loyal to the great king in Persepolis. Tribute flowed from Armenia, horses, silver, wine, and soldiers for Persian campaigns. Yet even under Persian rule, Armenia was not erased. Its nobles retained power, its traditions continued, its gods were worshipped on mountain peaks. The Persians demanded loyalty, but Armenia kept its soul. When Persia fell to Alexander the Great, Armenia bent but did not break. The Urartid rulers shifted allegiance, now subjects of Macedon, later of the Seleucids. Through every empire, Armenia endured. Rome enters the stage by the 1st century BCE. A new empire loomed, Rome. The Roman legions marched east, claiming territories, one by one, until their banners touched the borders of Armenia. Armenia became the battleground between Rome and Parthia. Both empires saw it as essential. Both sought to place their own candidates on the Armenian throne. Kings were crowned and dethroned by foreign will. Armenia became a prize in a larger game. The struggle of kings for Armenian kings. Survival was treacherous. Some leaned toward Rome, others toward Parthia. Some tried to balance, swearing loyalty to both, breaking it when needed. Betrayals, assassinations, and invasions were constant. The throne of Armenia was never secure. A king could rise with Roman support, only to be toppled when Parthia sent its armies. Another could rule with Parthian backing, until Rome marched east to replace him. Armenia's kingship was a crown of thorns, heavy with danger, the weight of the people. Yet, while kings schemed and empires fought, the people endured. Farmers still sowed fields, shepherds still tended flocks, craftsmen still forged tools and weapons. Life beneath empire was not easy. Taxes drained wealth. Wars brought destruction. But the Armenian people held fast to their land, their language, their faith. In villages and valleys, the empire's reach was distant, but the mountain was near, the river close, the soil familiar. These gave endurance where kings and empires failed. Upstage of blood, the struggle of Armenia between empires was not just political, it was bloody. Armies clashed in valleys, sieges consumed fortresses, villages burned in the path of conquest. Roman historians wrote of campaigns in Armenia, of victories and defeats, of kings installed and slain. To Rome and Parthia, Armenia was a chessboard. To Armenians, it was home, but a home soaked in blood, caught in wars not of their making. The balance of survival, and yet, Armenia endured. Neither Rome nor Parthia could claim it fully. Its mountains gave protection, its people gave resistance, its kings gave cunning. At times conquered, at times free, Armenia remained at the center, never erased, never forgotten. This was the fate of Armenia, to live between empires, to be desired but never owned, to suffer but never surrender. Closing reflections. Night falls once more over the plateau. The stars shine coldly, the rivers whisper through valleys, the mountains loom eternal. In the darkness, one feels the weight of history, the march of legions, the thunder of cavalry, the cries of kings. Armenia stood between empires. It was both shield and prize, battlefield and homeland, and through centuries of struggle, it remained bloodied, scarred, but unbroken. This was Armenia's destiny, to survive in the shadows of giants, to endure when empires fell, and to remain when all else passed away. Chapter 7. 2 Grains. The great. The mountains of Armenia had long guarded kings, but never had they seen one like 2 Grains. 2. The man whom history remembers as 2 Grains, the Great. His reign marked the pinnacle of Armenian power, the golden age when Armenia was not merely a land caught between empires, but an empire in its own right, vast, ambitious, and radiant with glory. Tigranes rose in a world of shifting empires, where Rome and Parthia battled for supremacy. Into this struggle, he carved his place, not as a pawn but as a king who would forge his own empire, stretching from the Caspian to the Mediterranean, from the Taurus Mountains to the Arabian deserts. For a moment in history, Armenia stood above its rivals, a kingdom of kings. The making of a king. Tigranes was born into the Artaxiad dynasty, in a time when Armenia was still a fragile kingdom under Parthian shadow. As a young prince, he was sent to Parthia as a hostage, a guarantee of his family's loyalty. For years, he lived under foreign watch, surrounded by Persian wealth and discipline, but exile sharpened him. When the time came, Tigranes returned to Armenia and ascended the throne. He was no mere provincial king. He had seen empires, studied their power, and learned their ways. He would not rule Armenia as it had always been ruled. He would make it greater. Expansion and power from the start. Tigranes moved with ambition. He expanded his army, forging alliances, and reclaiming lands once lost. His armies marched beyond Armenia's mountains, seizing Mesopotamia, Syria, and parts of Cappadocia. In time, he built an empire that stretched wider than any Armenian king before him. Roman historians, stunned by his reach, called him the King of Kings. For a fleeting age, Armenia was not the buffer between empires, it was the empire. The splendor of Tigrinos crowned his achievements. Tigrinos built a new capital, Tigrinos. It was a city of grandeur, with palaces, theaters, markets, and walls that gleamed in the sun. Foreign merchants filled its streets, soldiers paraded in shining armor, and courtiers gathered in splendid halls. Tigrinos was more than a city. It was a symbol, a declaration that Armenia had risen from the shadows. that its king commanded not just mountains, but plains and seas. Here Armenia was no longer a survivor. It was a conqueror. The challenge of Rhombus empires do not rise without enemies. Tigray's expansion brought him into conflict with the greatest power of all, Rome. First, Tigray's avoided direct conflict, but his alliance with Mithridates, the sixth of Pontus, Rome's sworn enemy, sealed his fate. When Mithridates sought refuge, Tigranes welcomed him. Rome responded with war. The Roman general Lucullus marched east, bringing legions into Armenia. At Tigrinos, the two powers clashed. Though Tigray's forces outnumbered Rome's, the discipline of the legions prevailed. His capital was seized, his empire shaken. Yet Tigray's did not fall. Retreating into the mountains, he rallied his people, fought on, and even against Rome's might, endured. His empire was diminished, but his throne remained. The end of an empire. Tigray's later years were marked by struggle. Rome pressed from the west, Parthia from the east. His vast empire crumbled piece by piece. But even as Armenia shrank back to its core, Tigray's kept his crown. For nearly 4 decades, he ruled, a survivor as much as a conqueror. When he died in 55 BCE, Armenia was no longer the vast empire he had built, but his legacy endured. For Armenians, he was the greatest of kings, the one who lifted their land from a crossroads to a throne. The legacy of Tigray's left behind more than conquests. He left a vision that Armenia was not destined merely to survive, but to rise, to command, to shape history. His empire fell, but his memory lived on, a beacon of what Armenia once was, and what it might be again, in the stones of ruined Tigrinos, in the echoes of Roman histories, in the songs of Armenia itself. Tigray's name remained. He was more than a king. He was the dream of Armenia's greatness. Closing reflections. Night falls over the ruins of Tigrinos. The walls are broken, the palace is silent. But in the wind one can almost hear the footsteps of armies, the voices of kings, the songs of triumph. Tigray's is gone, his empire dust. Yet the mountains remember, and as long as they stand, so too will the memory of Armenia's golden age. The age of Tigray's, the great, the king of kings, whose shadow still lingers on the land of Ararat. Chapter 8, Wars with Rome. The story of Armenia could never remain untouched by Rome. The legions, with their iron discipline and endless hunger for conquest, marched eastward until their banners shadowed the Armenian mountains. To Rome, Armenia was not merely another kingdom, it was the key between empires. A bridge between east and west, a prize too valuable to ignore. For centuries, Armenia's fate would be bound to Rome, at times as a reluctant ally, at times as a battlefield, at times as a pawn in the endless rivalry between Rome and Parthia. The wars with Rome were not just battles for land. They were struggles for survival, for sovereignty, for the very soul of Armenia. The shadow of Tigray's. The conflict began under the shadow of Tigray's the Great. His empire, vast and ambitious, had drawn Rome's gaze. The alliance with Mithridates, the sixth of Pontus, Rome's sworn enemy, was the spark. Rome sent its legions east, commanded by Lucullus, to crush the Pontic king and to humble Tigranes. At Tigrinos, the clash came. Tigray's forces outnumbered the Romans many times over, yet numbers could not overcome discipline. The Roman legions cut through the Armenian ranks, and the jewel of Tigray's empire fell. It was Rome's first taste of Armenia, and it would not be the last. Pompey in the east. After Lucullus came Pompey the Great, one of Rome's most renowned generals. He pursued Mithridates into the east, and forced Tigray's into submission. Yet here, Armenia's cunning showed. Rather than destroying Armenia outright, Pompey crowned Tigray's once more as king, though now as a client of Rome. Armenia survived, diminished but unbroken, its king wearing both crown and chains. The dance between Rome and Parthia. The wars with Rome were never one-sided. Armenia's throne became the playing piece between two great powers, Rome to the west and Parthia to the east. When a king leaned toward Rome, Parthia sent armies to replace him. When he leaned toward Parthia, Rome marched in. Armenian kings were crowned and dethroned, not by their people, but by the will of distant emperors. The land became a chessboard of empires. The people paid the price. Fields trampled by legions, villages burned by cavalry, fortresses besieged until their stones cracked under fire. Mark Antony's campaign in the 1st century BCE, Rome returned with new ambition. Mark Antony, seeking glory in the east, launched a great campaign into Parthian lands. Armenia was swept into his plans, its king forced to provide aid, but Antony's invasion faltered. His armies suffered, his supplies ran short, and Armenia slipped back into uncertainty. Once again, it endured as the empires clashed around it, the mountains sheltering its people as best they could. Armenia under Augustus. When Augustus became Rome's first emperor, Armenia remained central to imperial strategy. Rome could not control Parthia outright, but it could control Armenia. Through diplomacy, Rome placed kings upon the Armenian throne, sometimes Armenians, sometimes princes from neighboring lands, all bound to Roman will. Yet Parthia never yielded. Each Roman triumph was followed by Parthian resistance. Each crowned king faced rebellion or invasion. For the Armenians, this was an age of shifting rulers, uncertain loyalties, and endless wars. The strain of empire life under these wars was heavy. Taxes rose to pay for armies. Farmers lost harvests to marching legions. Nobles shifted allegiance to survive. The people of Armenia became accustomed to instability, one year under Rome's influence, the next under Parthia's. Yet, the culture endured. Armenian temples still smoked with offerings. Songs still echoed through valleys. Kings still held court when peace allowed. Even in war, the identity of Armenia was not erased. The pattern of struggle, the wars with Rome, did not end quickly. They stretched across generations. Armenia was the battlefield of emperors, the training ground of generals, the testing place of legions. Roman emperors boasted of victories in Armenia, but none could hold it fully. Time and again, Armenia slipped through their grasp, too far, too rugged, too loyal to its own spirit, to become just another Roman province. Closing Reflections Night descends on the ruins of a Roman camp in Armenia. The fire pits are cold, the walls collapsed, but the earth remembers the tramp of legions, the clash of shields, the roar of armies. Rome came with iron, with banners, with ambition, but Armenia endured. Its throne was shaken, its fields scarred, its kings made and unmade, yet it lived on. The wars with Rome were not the end of Armenia, they were proof of its endurance. For though empires marched across it, Armenia remained scarred, diminished, yet unbroken, waiting for the next dawn. Chapter 9. Faith of the Ancients. Before the cross, before the church, before the words of Scripture echoed in the valleys, Armenia's faith belonged to the mountains, to the fire, to the sun, and to the unseen spirits of the land. The ancient Armenians were a people whose religion was woven into the very fabric of their environment. Rivers were sacred, peaks were holy, stones carried power, and the sky itself was a living presence. In this world of gods and spirits, temples crowned the highlands, sacrifices burned in the open air, and kings ruled not only by sword but by divine favor. Faith was not separate from life, it was life. The unseen rhythm that guided every season, every harvest, every war. The pantheon of the Armenians. The Armenians, like many ancient peoples, worshipped a pantheon of gods, deities, who embodied nature, strength, fertility, and the mysteries of the cosmos. Some were native to the Armenian highlands, born from local traditions. Others flowed in from neighboring civilizations. Urartu, Persia, Mesopotamia, mingling into a uniquely Armenian faith. Among the greatest was Aramis, the chief god, a figure of creation and power, often equated with the Persian Ahura Mazda. To him, offerings of animals and treasures were made, prayers spoken for fertility, protection, and the prosperity of the kingdom. Beside him stood Anahit, goddess of fertility, motherhood, and healing. Temples of Anahit were among the most revered in Armenia, where pilgrims sought her blessings, and statues of gold shimmered in the torchlight. She was not distant but near, the goddess who watched over women, children, and the cycles of the earth. There was Vahan, the dragon slayer, the fiery warrior god. In legend, he was born of flame, his hair blazing, his eyes lightning. He was the god of war, courage, and storm, protector in battle, and avenger of wrongs. His myths spoke of strength against chaos, of fire against the dark. And there was Ask, goddess of love and beauty, associated with the stars, with water, with the tenderness of human affection. Her worship often involved rites of water and light, a gentle counterpart to the harsher gods of fire and battle. These were not distant abstractions, but living presences. Their temples rose in stone and wood, their images carved in metal and clay. Their names carried on the lips of shepherds and kings alike. Temples of stone and fire, the sacred places of Armenia, were as varied as the land itself. Some temples stood in cities, commanding crowds of worshippers. Others crowned mountain peaks, where priests lit fires to the gods and smoke curled into the heavens. One of the most famous was the Temple of Garni, dedicated to Mir, the sun god. Built with columns and stone, it blended Greco-Roman style with Armenian spirit, a symbol of the openness of Armenian faith to outside influences. When sunlight struck its stones, it seemed to glow with divine presence. Elsewhere, shrines were simpler, altars of rough stone, offerings of food, wine, or blood poured upon the earth. For the Armenians, every place could be sacred, every river or peak a dwelling of gods or spirits. Rituals and sacrifice religion was not only belief, but action. Priests oversaw sacrifices, animals offered to gods, their lifeblood carrying prayers skyward. Fire was central. Sacred flames lit in temples, torches carried in rituals, the eternal fire of Vahan burning as a sign of divine power. Festivals marked the seasons, celebrations of planting and harvest, of victory and mourning. Music filled the air, drums beat in rhythm, dancers moved in circles, as if to echo the cycles of nature itself. These rituals were both personal and political. Kings joined them to affirm their divine favor. Armies sought blessings before battle. Families prayed for fertility and protection. Faith was the heartbeat of Armenian life. The kings and the gods. Armenian kings were not only rulers of men, but chosen of the gods. Their authority rested on divine sanction. A king who angered the gods risked famine, defeat, or rebellion. A king who pleased them brought prosperity and victory. Tigranes the Great, like those before him, built temples, offered sacrifices, and invoked the gods as guardians of his rule. In this way, politics and religion intertwined, each king a servant of the gods, each god a protector of the throne. Echoes of older faiths. Much of Armenian paganism carried echoes of Urartu, the ancient kingdom that had once dominated the land. The great god Haldi of Urartu faded, yet his essence lingered in Vahan, the fiery warrior. Other deities blended into new forms, adapted into the growing Armenian pantheon. Influences from Persia and Mesopotamia also seeped in Zoroastrian fire cults, Mesopotamian myths of fertility and war. Armenia absorbed them all, reshaping them in its own image. The living faith of the land. What made Armenian faith unique was its intimacy with the land. Every mountain seemed a throne of the divine, every spring a gift of life, every storm a message from the heavens. To live in Armenia was to live in constant awareness of the sacred. When thunder rolled over the peaks, it was Vahan's voice. When stars glimmered in the night sky, they were Aztec's veil. When harvests came, it was Anahit's blessing. Religion was not distant, but woven into every breath of life. The coming storm yet, even as the faith of the ancients flourished. A new belief was stirring beyond the horizon, a faith that would one day replace temples with churches, fire altars with crosses, and the old gods with the one God of Scripture. But that moment had not yet come. In the age of the ancients, Armenia's soul still belonged to the mountain gods, to the fire, to the dragon slayer, to the goddess of stars. Closing reflections. Night falls on the temple of Garni. The columns stand silent, the air cool, the sky heavy with stars. Once, priests tended flames here. Once, worshippers lifted their voices. Once, the gods of Armenia were called upon by name. Now, only ruins remain. But in the silence, one can almost hear the echoes, the chant of priests, the crackle of fire, the heartbeat of an ancient faith that shaped a people, a land, and a destiny. The faith of the ancients is gone, yet not forgotten. Its spirit lingers, in the stones, in the mountains, in the memory of Armenia itself. Chapter 10. The Conversion to Christianity. The mountains remember the sound of fire altars and the chants of priests. They remember the sacrifices, the incense, the gods of sun and storm. But in the early 4th century, Armenia's destiny shifted forever. The old gods faded, and a new faith rose, one that would define Armenia for centuries to come. This was the conversion to Christianity. The moment Armenia became the first kingdom in the world to embrace the cross. It was a turning point, not only in religion but in identity. A transformation of the Armenian soul. The seeds of faith Christianity had reached Armenia quietly, carried by merchants, travelers, and missionaries. In hidden gatherings, in whispered prayers, small communities of believers spread across the land. Their faith was dangerous. Rome had persecuted Christians, Persia despised them, and Armenian kings upheld the old gods. Yet the seed of faith grew. Stories of Christ, of his crucifixion and resurrection, spread from mouth to mouth. For the oppressed, it was a message of hope. For the faithful, it was truth. Gregory the Illuminator. At the heart of Armenia's conversion stood Gregory the Illuminator, a man of noble birth who endured suffering to bring the new faith. Arrested and imprisoned in a pit for years, Gregory's story became legend. When the king himself fell into torment, it was Gregory who was released, Gregory who healed him, Gregory who brought light where there had been only darkness. Gregory was no mere preacher. He was the bridge between the old world and the new, the figure who carried Armenia into Christianity and forever earned the name Illuminator. The baptism of a kingdom, the king, Tiridates III, once a persecutor of Christians, became the great convert. His transformation was as dramatic as his reign from slaughterer of the faithful to defender of the cross. With Gregory by his side, Tiridates declared Christianity the official faith of Armenia. Around 301 CE, the temples of the old gods were broken, the fire altars extinguished, the statues of Anahit and Vahan cast down. In their place rose churches, wooden at first, then of stone, crowned with the cross. It was not merely a change of ritual, it was a rebirth of Armenia, a nation. Transformed. The conversion was not peaceful. Many clung to the old gods, priests resisted, and traditions endured in secret. But over time, the new faith spread from the throne to the villages, from the nobles to the shepherds. Christianity gave Armenia a new unity. No longer was it only a land between empires, it was a Christian kingdom, distinct and proud, with a faith that set it apart from both Rome and Persia. The first churches, the early churches, were simple, but they carried profound weight. Crosses carved in stone, altars raised where once idols stood, prayers spoken in Armenian tongue. Each church was not only a place of worship, but a symbol of victory. The triumph of the cross over the old ways. These first churches laid the foundation for Armenia's unique architecture. The domed cathedrals and stone monasteries that would later rise in mountains and valleys. Timeless in their silence, the cost of faith conversion brought new dangers. Persia, still loyal to its fire worship, saw Armenia's Christianity as betrayal. Rome, though also Christian in later centuries, often sought to control the Armenian church. Wars followed, persecutions continued, and the cross became not just a symbol of faith, but of resistance. To be Armenian was to be Christian, and to be Christian was to suffer. Yet through suffering came endurance, and through endurance, identity. Closing reflections. Night falls over the ruins of an ancient temple, where once flames rose to pagan gods. Now, a cross of stone stands in silence, illuminated by the stars. The chants of priests have faded, the sacrifices forgotten, but a new song fills the air, the hymn of Christ. Armenia's conversion was not merely a change of ritual, but a rebirth of spirit. The first kingdom of the cross, it became a beacon. In a world still clinging to the old ways, the faith of the ancients had ended. The faith of eternity had begun. Chapter 11. The Cross and the Sword. The cross had come to Armenia, carried by Gregory the Illuminator, embraced by King Tiridates, and planted firmly into the soil of the highlands. But the acceptance of Christianity did not bring immediate peace. The sword still ruled the land. For centuries, faith and violence walked side by side, and the new religion was tested by fire, by war, and by blood. The struggle was not only against foreign empires, but within Armenia itself. The old gods did not vanish quietly. Priests of Vahan, Anahit, and Mir resisted the new order. Nobles who clung to tradition raised arms in rebellion. To be Christian was no longer simply belief, it was a choice that demanded sacrifice, loyalty, and often bloodshed. The fall of the old faith. The temples of the pagan gods were torn down, their statues broken, their rituals outlawed. But paganism did not die in a single stroke. In villages, in remote valleys, the old faith lingered. Farmers still whispered to the gods of harvest. Warriors still prayed to Vahan before battle. Women still lit lamps to Anahit in secret. For decades, Armenia lived between two worlds, the new faith of Christ and the old worship of fire and stone. The tension between them created not only division, but violence. The sword of resistance. Some nobles refused to abandon their ancestral gods. They raised armies against the Christian king, believing that to forsake the old faith was to invite disaster. Battles erupted across Armenia as these lords resisted conversion. The Christian crown answered with the sword. Villages loyal to the old gods were subdued, temples burned, rebellions crushed. The cross triumphed not only by faith, but by force. The age of pagan Armenia ended not in quiet surrender, but in blood and iron. The price of conversion also came with heavy cost from outside. Persia, devoted to Zoroastrian fire worship, looked upon Armenia's Christianity as treachery. Wars erupted, invasions swept the land, and Armenian Christians suffered persecution. Martyrs were made, men, women, even children, who refused to abandon their new faith. Their blood became the seed of deeper devotion. For Armenians, Christianity was not an easy path. It was a road of struggle, where the cross was carried with pain, but also with pride. The sword of the king. Armenian kings who followed Tiridates wielded both cross and sword. They defended their realm against Persia, balanced alliances with Rome, and sought to root Christianity deeper into the land. Each battle they fought was not only for survival, but for faith itself. A king who fell risked more than a lost throne. He risked the loss of Armenia's Christian soul. Thus, every war became holy, every defense of the homeland a defense of the cross. A nation of martyrs and warriors in these centuries, Armenia became a nation of both martyrs and warriors. The faithful endured torture and death rather than deny Christ. The soldiers fought with steel and shield to preserve their kingdom. The two paths merged into one identity. An Armenian was both Christian and fighter, bound by faith and fate. The Stories of these martyrs and warriors spread across the land. Songs told of their courage, priests blessed their memory, and their names became a part of the living tradition of Armenia. The balance of faith and power, the struggle between cross and sword, did not destroy Armenia. Instead, it forged it. Out of violence and persecution, out of rebellion and suppression, came a new unity. By the 5th century, the old gods had faded into memory, their temples silent, their names whispered only in legend. What remained was Christianity, not as a fragile new belief, but as the unshakable core of Armenian identity. The sword had carved it into the land, and the cross had sanctified it with blood. Closing reflections. Night descends upon a ruined temple, its stones cracked, its idols broken. Nearby, the outline of a simple church rises, its cross lit by the moonlight. The silence carries both memory and promise, the memory of gods now gone, and the promise of a faith that endures. The cross came with struggle, and the sword gave it permanence. Armenia was no longer divided between many gods. It was now the land of one faith, one church, one destiny, sanctified by both prayer and battle. Chapter 12. The Armenian Apostolic Church. The mountains of Armenia are crowned with stone. Not only the stones of fortresses or the ruins of temples past, but the stones of churches, ancient, solemn, enduring. They rise from cliffs, valleys, and wind-swept plains, their domes pointing to the heavens, their walls etched with crosses. These are not only buildings, they are guardians of memory, witnesses to centuries of faith, and the heart of the Armenian soul. This is the story of the Armenian Apostolic Church, one of the world's oldest Christian institutions, born in struggle, nurtured in isolation, and preserved through fire and invasion. To speak of Armenia without it is impossible, for the church was not only a place of prayer, it was a kingdom of spirit, a fortress of culture, and the keeper of identity. The birth of the church after the conversion of Tiridates and the mission of Gregory the Illuminator. Armenia needed more than scattered believers. It needed an order, a structure, a church, to bind the kingdom together. Gregory became the first Catholicos, the head of the Armenian church, guiding it as both shepherd and father. Under him, the first monasteries were founded, the first bishops ordained, the first councils convened. Christianity was no longer a fragile seed, it had become an institution. From this moment, the Armenian Apostolic Church was born, independent, distinct, and rooted firmly in the soil of Armenia. It would become both shield and sanctuary. Guardians of language and faith. The church was more than a religious body. It was the keeper of Armenian language, history, and culture. In a land threatened by mighty empires, the church preserved what might have otherwise been lost. In the 5th century, the creation of the Armenian alphabet by Mesrop Mashtats transformed faith into permanence. The Bible was translated into Armenian, hymns were composed, prayers recorded. Through words, the faith of the people became unshakable. The alphabet was not only letters, it was survival. The church became the school, the library, the scribe of history. Without it, Armenia's memory might have been erased. With it, the nation endured. Monasteries of stone and silence across the mountains. Monasteries rose. Some clung to cliffs, others hid in valleys, others crowned remote plateaus. They were not only places of worship, but of refuge, learning, and resistance. Monks copied manuscripts in candlelight, preserving knowledge while empires burned outside. Pilgrims walked miles to pray in chapels carved into rock. Warriors sought blessing before battle. Kings sought counsel in times of peril. Each monastery was a stone heartbeat of the nation. Even in ruins today, they breathe silence and mystery, as if the chants of long-dead monks still echo within their walls. Independence of tin-like other churches that bent to Rome or Byzantium, the Armenian Apostolic Church stood apart. It was neither Catholic nor Orthodox, but uniquely Armenian. Its rites were ancient, its liturgy distinct, its authority sovereign. This independence often brought hardship. Rome called Armenians heretics. Byzantium sought to control them. Yet the Armenians refused to surrender their church. To them, it was more than religion. It was the essence of their nationhood. The church as shield through centuries of invasions. Persian, Arab, Mongol, Turk, and more. The church stood as a shield. When kings fell, when fortresses crumbled, when dynasties vanished, the church endured. It was the one institution that could not be uprooted. Priests carried faith into caves, villages rebuilt churches after they were burned, and manuscripts hidden in mountains resurfaced generations later. Empires tried to erase Armenia. The church preserved it. Faith in X11, when Armenians were scattered, forced from their homeland, their church traveled with them. Wherever a community of Armenians settled, a church was built. The stone cross, the cocker followed them. Thus, the Armenian Apostolic Church became not only a national church, but a diaspora church, a bridge across centuries and continents, keeping the identity alive, even far from Mount Ararat. Closing. Reflections. The Armenian Apostolic Church is not only a house of prayer, it is a house of memory, carved in stone and written in faith. Its walls have felt the weight of centuries, its domes have watched armies come and go, and its silence has preserved a nation's soul. Night falls over Echmiadzin, the mother cathedral of Armenia, where legend says Christ himself descended in vision to Gregory the Illuminator. Candles flicker in the dark, and the hymn of centuries rises once again. The church endures, as it always has. For Armenia, to lose the church was to lose itself, and so it has remained unbroken, unyielding, eternal. Chapter 13. Invasions from the east. The Armenian highlands have always stood at a crossroads. To the west lay Rome and Byzantium. To the east stretched Persia, and beyond it, the endless steppe. Armenia was never hidden, never left alone. Its mountains were too rich in stone, its valleys too fertile, its position too strategic. And so, from the east, waves of conquerors came: Persians, Arabs, Turks, Mongols, each leaving scars upon the land, each testing the endurance of Armenia's soul. The story of these invasions is not only a tale of conquest, but of survival. For while armies swept across the plains and castles burned, Armenia did not vanish. Its faith, its language, its church, these endured like the granite cliffs themselves. The shadow of Persia even, before the rise of Christianity, Armenia lived, under the looming shadow of Persia. The mighty Sassanid Empire saw Armenia as both prize and buffer, a land to be controlled. A shield against Rome. After Armenia embraced Christianity, Persia's hostility deepened. Zoroastrian fire temples clashed with Christian crosses. Armenian nobles were pressured to abandon their faith and bow to the fire worship of Persia. Some wavered, others resisted. The struggle culminated in the Battle of Ararat in 451 CE, when Armenian warriors, led by Vardan Mamikonian, rose against the Persians. Though the Armenians were defeated on the battlefield, their defiance preserved the Christian identity of their people. It was a paradoxical victory, won not by survival of arms, but by survival of faith. The Arab conquest. In the 7th century, a new force appeared, the armies of Islam, swift and relentless. The Arabs swept across Persia and into Armenia. Castles fell, cities yielded, and Armenia was drawn into the orbit of the caliphate. The Arabs imposed tribute and garrisons. But unlike Persia, they did not demand conversion by force. Christianity endured, though under the burden of heavy taxes and second-class status. Nobles played a careful game, submitting when necessary, resisting when possible. Yet even under the caliphate, the Armenian church remained unbroken. In monasteries hidden in the mountains, manuscripts were copied, prayers continued, and the faith lived on in silence. Waves of Turks. By the 11th century, the storm grew fiercer. Nomadic tribes from the steppes, the Seljuk Turks descended upon Armenia. Their horsemen burned villages, shattered armies, and carved their way into the heart of the highlands. The Seljuks brought devastation, but also change. Armenian nobles and peasants alike fled westward, carrying their culture and faith into new lands. It was in this time of displacement that the seeds of a new kingdom, Cilician Armenia, were sown. But within the homeland, the scars deepened, the highlands bled, yet the stones of monasteries and khachkars stood defiantly, as if whispering, "We endure." The Mongol tempest in the 13th century, an even darker shadow fell, the Mongols. Their armies were unlike anything the Armenians had faced before, swift, ruthless, merciless. Entire cities were burned, entire populations slaughtered. Armenian princes, recognizing the futility of resistance, submitted and sought alliances with the Mongol Khans. For a time, Armenia survived under their protection, even fighting alongside Mongols against Muslim powers. But such protection was fragile. When the Mongols weakened, the Mamluks of Egypt swept in, striking Cilicia and breaking Armenian power once more. The endless cycle from Persia to Arabs, from Turks to Mongols, Armenia was crushed again and again beneath the feet of empires. And yet, something extraordinary occurred. Despite the invasions, despite the devastation, Armenia never truly disappeared. Its land was scarred, but its soul endured. The faith of the Apostolic Church, the language of mashtots, the songs of warriors and martyrs, these survived when kings and fortresses did not. Every invasion threatened to erase Armenia. Every survival proved it eternal. Closing reflections. Night falls over the ruins of a burned monastery. The walls are blackened, the dome shattered, but a single cross still rises against the stars. Around it, silence. Yet in that silence lies defiance. The invaders came and went. The Persians, the Arabs, the Turks, the Mongols, all left their scars. But Armenia, wounded and bloodied, endured. The mountains kept their watch. The church kept its faith. The people kept their memory. The story of Armenia is not the story of conquest. It is the story of survival. Chapter 14. Byzantium and Armenia. Between the mountains of Armenia and the blue waters of the Bosporus stretched the dominion of Byzantium, the Eastern Roman Empire. For centuries, Byzantium cast its long shadow over Armenia. At times, it was protector and ally. At others, it was rival and conqueror. Always, it was an inescapable presence. Armenia stood between two giants, Persia in the east and Byzantium in the west. Its kings balanced, negotiated, and often bled to survive between them. With Byzantium, the bond was especially complex, for the Armenians were Christian, yet not of the same creed. Warriors, yet often used as pawns. Neighbors, yet never equals. The tale of Byzantium and Armenia is a tale of friendship, betrayal, and survival, played out across centuries of shifting fortunes. Shared faith. Divided church in the surface. Byzantium and Armenia shared the same faith, Christianity. Both kingdoms had cast down the old gods. Both raised crosses above their cities. Both claimed to defend the true faith. But beneath this unity lay division. Byzantium followed the Chalcedonian doctrine, declaring Christ to exist in two natures, divine and human. Armenia, however, rejected this counsel, holding instead to the ancient Miaphysite tradition, one united nature of Christ. What might seem to outsiders a fine distinction was, in the medieval world, enough to create suspicion, hostility, and division. Byzantium often accused Armenia of heresy, while Armenia clung fiercely to its independence of faith. The two were brothers in Christ, yet always estranged. Soldiers of the empire, despite theological rifts. Armenians often served in the armies of Byzantium. Renowned for their courage and skill, Armenian warriors rose to prominence, As generals, commanders, and even emperors, legends tell of entire Armenian regiments forming the backbone of Byzantine defense. They guarded frontiers, fought Persians, and marched in campaigns across the empire. Some Armenians found glory in Constantinople, yet their homeland often paid the price. For while individuals prospered, Armenia itself remained a contested land, carved and recarved by imperial ambition. The grip of Constantinople at various times. Byzantium sought to bring Armenia fully under its rule. Sometimes this came through diplomacy, marriage alliances, or promises of protection. Other times, it came by force. Armenian nobles were pressured, bishops persuaded, fortresses seized, yet Byzantium never fully trusted Armenia. Its suspicion of Armenian independence, both political and religious, kept the relationship uneasy. Armenians, in turn, looked to Byzantium with both admiration and resentment, drawn to its wealth and culture, yet wary of its domination, betrayals, and broken promises. History is heavy with moments when Byzantium failed Armenia. At times of invasion, Armenia called for aid, only to be abandoned. Treaties promised protection, but ended in neglect. One of the darkest betrayals came during the rise of the Seljuk Turks. At Manzikert, in 1071, Byzantine forces, many of them Armenian, were crushed. In the aftermath, Byzantium withdrew, leaving Armenia exposed. The highlands, once a buffer for the empire, were left to the fury of Turkish horsemen. For Armenians, the lesson was bitter. Byzantium was an ally when convenient, but never when most needed. Cultural crossroads. Yet the relationship was not only war and politics. Byzantine influence flowed into Armenia in art, architecture, and learning. Frescoes, mosaics, and church designs bore echoes of Constantinople. Armenian scholars visited Byzantine courts, exchanging ideas and manuscripts. At the same time, Armenia influenced Byzantium. Its warriors, its generals, its traditions of endurance left a deep mark on imperial history. The exchange was constant, sometimes enriching, sometimes consuming, enduring distance despite centuries of contact. Armenia never became Byzantium. The Apostolic Church never yielded to Constantinople. The language never gave way to Greek. The spirit of independence never faded. The Armenians remained themselves allies, rivals, sometimes subjects, but always distinct, in their mountains. They preserved what Byzantium could not control, an identity forged in hardship, sanctified by faith, and guarded by stone. Closing reflections. Night falls over the Bosporus. The golden domes of Constantinople gleam under the stars, while far to the east, the silent mountains of Armenia lie cloaked in shadow. Between them stretches a history of both closeness and distance, of shared prayers and broken promises. Byzantium gave Armenia much allies, generals, cultural wealth, but it also demanded too much in return. In the end, Armenia endured, not because of Byzantium, but despite it. The two were bound together by faith, yet divided by destiny. And as centuries passed, Armenia's trials with Byzantium prepared it for even greater challenges to come. Chapter 15. Bagratid. Armenia. The mountains of Armenia had endured countless invasions, betrayals, and the slow erosion of empires. Yet, from the shadows of destruction, a new light emerged, a dynasty that would restore the kingdom to glory, stability, and culture. This was the age of Bagratid Armenia, when kings once again ruled from the heart of the highlands, and the nation found a renaissance amidst the echoes of past struggles. The Bagratid dynasty was more than a ruling family. It was a symbol of survival, a testament that Armenia could rise again from ashes, and that the spirit of its people remained unbroken. The rise of the Bagratids in the 9th century. As the caliphate weakened and neighboring empires faltered, Armenian nobles saw an opportunity. Among them, the Bagratuni family rose to prominence. Their claim to the throne was ancient, their lineage noble, and their ambition unmistakable. A century of struggle had left Armenia fractured lands, divided among local lords, fortresses held in semi-independence, and borders vulnerable to external threats. The Bagrat sought to unify these fragmented territories under a single crown, a bold endeavor that required both diplomacy and force. A kingdom restored by 885 CE, Ancient I Bagratuni was crowned king, marking the formal establishment of Bagratid Armenia. The coronation was not merely ceremonial. It was a declaration of independence, a reclaiming of Armenian sovereignty in the face of both Arab and Byzantine pressures. Under Ancient and his successors, Armenia experienced stability unseen for centuries. Cities flourished, fortresses were rebuilt, trade routes reopened. The kingdom became a center of commerce, learning, and culture, for the first time in generations. Armenians looked to the future with cautious hope rather than constant fear. Capital of glory, the Bagratid kings established Ani as their capital, a city destined to become legendary. Perched upon cliffs, Ani was a fortress city, yet also a center of art, religion, and commerce. Its streets were filled with merchants from distant lands, its churches adorned with intricate carvings, its walls echoing the chants of priests and the footsteps of soldiers. I was called the city of 1001 churches, a testament to Armenia's renewed spiritual and architectural ambition. It became the heart of a kingdom that sought not only survival but greatness, culture, and learning. Bagratid Armenia was more than a political revival. It was a cultural renaissance. Monasteries became centers of learning. Scholars copied manuscripts, chronicled histories, and translated texts from Greek, Syriac, and Arabic. The kingdom produced poets, theologians, and architects whose works would endure for centuries. Armenian culture, shaped by millennia of struggle, now flourished openly, confident in its own identity, defending the kingdom. Yet the Bagratids ruled a land still threatened by outsiders. Byzantium watched Armenia's growing strength with suspicion. Muslim Amorites to the south plotted incursions. Even internal noble families could rebel, seeking autonomy or power. The Bagratid kings maintained their rule through both diplomacy and war. They forged alliances, negotiated marriages, and built fortresses across the highlands. Their armies, though smaller than foreign empires, were disciplined and loyal, defending the kingdom against waves of invasion. Faith as foundation central to the Bagratid revival was the Armenian Apostolic Church. Kings worked closely with the Catholicos, ensuring that faith and state were intertwined. Churches were rebuilt, monasteries expanded, and religious education promoted. Faith provided legitimacy. It unified a fragmented population. It reminded the people that Armenia was not merely a land of stone and mountains, but a nation under God, chosen to endure challenges and decline. No dynasty lasts forever. By the 11th century, external pressures mounted. Byzantine encroachment, Seljuk invasions, and internal divisions began to erode Bagratid authority. Cities like Ani faced sieges. Nobles grew restless. The kingdom's golden age began to fade, yet its cultural and spiritual legacy endured. Even in decline, Bagratid Armenia proved that the nation could rise again from devastation. Its monuments, churches, and manuscripts preserved a civilization that had endured centuries of conquest. Closing reflections. Night falls over the cliffs of Ani. The city, now in ruins, still holds the echoes of 1,000 prayers, the footsteps of merchants, and the banners of kings. The Bagratid kings may have faded from power, yet their legacy is eternal. They restored Armenia not only as a kingdom, but as a culture, a faith, and an identity. They proved that after centuries of invasions, betrayals, and despair, Armenia could rise again, stronger, wiser, and radiant in the highlands of history. Chapter 16. The Kingdom of Cilicia. When the highlands of Armenia fell under pressure from Seljuk invasions in the 11th century, many Armenians fled south, seeking refuge along the Mediterranean coast. Here, on the rocky cliffs and fertile plains of Cilicia, they would carve out a new homeland, a kingdom that became a beacon of Armenian culture, trade, and resilience. This was the Kingdom of Cilicia, a shining jewel forged in exile, rising amidst turmoil, and entwined with the drama of the Crusades. Cilicia was more than a political entity. It was a sanctuary, a fortress, a city of merchants, a hub of faith. It represented Armenia's unyielding spirit, its ability to survive, adapt, and flourish far from its ancestral mountains. Flight and resettlement, as Seljuk horsemen swept through the Armenian highlands. Thousands fled southward. Families, monks, artisans, and nobles carried with them not only their belongings, but also their culture, language, and faith. Cilicia, then a borderland of Byzantine and Muslim territories, offered refuge. Its cliffs and rivers provided natural defense. Its ports offered opportunity for trade. Slowly, the Armenian refugees settled, building villages and fortresses, and slowly transforming the region into a cohesive polity, establishing the kingdom by the late 12th century. Armenian lords consolidated power under the leadership of the Rubenid dynasty. They declared Cilicia an independent Armenian kingdom, with rulers crowned as kings rather than princes. This new kingdom maintained strong ties to its highland heritage. The Armenian Apostolic Church guided its people. Monasteries and churches rose from cliffs and valleys, and the traditions of Ani and Bagratid Armenia were preserved in a new land. Cilicia was not simply a place of refuge. It became a kingdom in its own right, a bridge between East and West, a fortress against invasion, and a hub of commerce and diplomacy. Alliance with the Crusader Cilicia, strategic location along the Mediterranean brought it into contact with European crusaders. Armenian kings cultivated alliances with these Western warriors, providing soldiers, supplies, and ports for campaigns in the Holy Land. These alliances brought both wealth and influence. Cilician kings adopted some Western customs, forged marriages with Crusader nobility, and encouraged trade with Italian city-states. Yet they never abandoned their Armenian identity. Faith, language, and tradition remained firmly rooted in the kingdom. Fortresses and defense. Cilicia was a land of fortresses. From Sis, the royal capital, to Kukhav, Anazarbis, and countless cliff-top castles, the kingdom was prepared for war. The rugged terrain, combined with skilled soldiers, made Cilicia a formidable target for enemies. The Armenian army combined infantry, cavalry, and siege defense. Monks often assisted in intelligence and strategy, while the royal family personally led troops in times of crisis. The kingdom's survival depended on vigilance, courage, and the unyielding will of its people. Culture and trade. Cilicia was a center of culture as well as defense. Merchants from Venice, Genoa, and other Mediterranean ports arrived, exchanging goods, ideas, and art. Armenian artisans produced manuscripts, carvings, and metalwork that rivaled anything in Europe. Monasteries became schools, churches became centers of learning, and royal courts became patrons of literature and architecture. Even in exile, Armenians had preserved their civilization, demonstrating that culture could endure even in foreign lands. Religious life. Faith remained central to Cilician Armenia. The Armenian Apostolic Church guided daily life, educated the youth, and legitimized the monarchy. The cross, carved into stone walls and towers, reminded all who entered that despite exile, the Armenian spirit was unbroken. Even with Western influence and Crusader contact, the Church maintained its independence, ensuring that Cilicia remained Armenian at heart, not simply a medieval Mediterranean polity. Decline and fall. Despite its strengths, Cilicia faced relentless pressure. Mamluks from Egypt, Mongols, and later Ottoman forces challenged the kingdom repeatedly. By the late 14th century, the kingdom began to weaken, losing territory and autonomy. In 1375, Cilicia fell definitively, ending centuries of Armenian rule in exile. Yet its legacy endured. Churches, manuscripts, fortresses, and trade networks carried Armenian culture forward, and its memory remained a beacon for diasporic Armenians scattered across the world. Closing reflections. Night descends over the cliffs of Cis and the ruins of Cilicia. Once bustling cities and fortified castles now lie in silence. Yet the memory of a kingdom that rose from exile lives on. Cilicia was a testament to Armenian resilience. Even when the homeland was lost, even when mountains were abandoned, the Armenian spirit survived. Its kings, warriors, monks, and merchants proved that a nation could endure and even thrive far from its ancestral soil. In exile, Armenia had forged a kingdom, and in memory, that kingdom endures forever. Chapter 17. Castles and Crusaders. The mountains and cliffs of Armenia have always told a story written in stone, iron, and blood. Fortresses rise from cliffs like silent sentinels, walls blackened by fire, yet unbroken by time, gates carved into rock, towers that pierce the sky. These were the castles of Armenia, places where kings ruled, soldiers fought, and faith endured. During the age of the Crusades, Armenian fortresses became more than defensive structures. They were meeting points of east and west, places where knights, merchants, and pilgrims crossed paths with Armenian kings and monks. Here, the cross met the sword, and Armenia's resilience was tested against the tides of history. The art of defense. Armenian castles were masterpieces of medieval military engineering, perched on cliffs, overlooking narrow passes, or guarding river valleys. They were designed to be almost impregnable. Walls rose in multiple layers, reinforced with towers at strategic points. Gates were narrow and easily defended. Inside, water reservoirs, storerooms, and hidden passages ensured survival during long sieges. Each fortress was a city unto itself, a bastion of faith, governance, and military might. The castles were not merely functional. They were symbols of Armenian endurance. Each stone carried centuries of labor, devotion, and determination. A silent message to any who would threaten the kingdom. Armenia endures. Cilicia's strategic fortresses, the Kingdom of Cilicia, castles, were vital. From Cis, the royal capital, to Anazarbis and Kochav. These fortresses controlled trade routes, rivers, and mountain passes. Their design often combined native Armenian architecture with influences from Crusader, engineers, and Byzantine builders. These strongholds were not only military centers, but also administrative hubs. Taxes were collected, courts held, and the king's authority reinforced from the walls. They were the backbone of the kingdom's survival, guarding both people and culture from the pressures of foreign empires. The Crusader connection. When Western Crusaders arrived in the Levant, Armenian kings saw opportunity. Alliances were forged, marriages arranged, and military aid provided. Crusaders sought ports, supplies, and soldiers for campaigns to the Holy Land. Armenians offered their fortresses, their cavalry, and their knowledge of the terrain. This connection brought both wealth and danger. Trade flourished with Italian and French merchants. Crusader knights passed through Armenian castles, learning of the East and leaving traces of Western culture. Yet the alliances were fragile. Crusaders often viewed Armenians as secondary allies, and political ambitions sometimes clashed with Armenian sovereignty. Battles and sieges. The castles of Armenia were tested constantly. Muslim armies, Mamluks, and Seljuk forces attempted to seize them, often laying prolonged sieges. Siege engines rattled against walls, fires burned, and defenders held their ground with arrows boiling oil and unyielding courage. Many castles fell, yet others withstood centuries of assault. The lessons of these battles were etched into Armenian military tradition. The high ground was sacred. the walls invincible when manned by the faithful, and every stone defended not only land but culture. Monks and warriors' Armenian castles were not just for soldiers. Monks and priests lived within their walls, tending to faith, copying manuscripts, and educating the young. Even in the heart of war, religion remained central. The interplay of faith and warfare was constant. Warriors prayed before battle, monks blessed arrows and swords, and churches inside fortresses provided spiritual refuge. In this way, the cross and the sword coexisted, defining both strategy and identity. Architecture and innovation. Armenian engineers adapted constantly. They learned from Byzantines, from Crusaders, and even from their enemies. Water systems were hidden underground, secret tunnels led out of fortresses, and parapets allowed defenders to strike from safety. Yet despite adaptation, the castles remained uniquely Armenian. Their style, pointed towers, thick walls, intricate carvings, reflected both the environment and the enduring spirit of a people shaped by mountains and fire. The legacy of the castles today. Many of these fortresses lie in ruin, blackened by centuries and weathered by wind and rain. Yet their legacy is unbroken. They are silent witnesses to a time when Armenia stood between empires, when faith and culture were defended as fiercely as land and life. The castles of Armenia tell a story not only of war, but of survival, ingenuity, and devotion. They remind us that even in exile, even under siege, Armenians carved permanence out of stone and courage. Closing reflections. Night descends over the ruins of Sis, Anazarbis, and Kakov. The wind whistles through shattered gates, carrying echoes of battle cries and prayers alike. Towers that once bristled with soldiers now stand silent, yet their presence remains a testament to endurance. In every stone, in every wall, lies the memory of a kingdom that faced the Crusaders, the Mamluks, and the tides of history itself. The castles endure, as do the stories, as does the Armenian spirit. Armenia's history is written not only in blood and faith, but in stone, a fortress, for memory, identity, and survival. Chapter 18, Fall of Cilicia. The sun sets over the cliffs of Cilicia, casting long shadows across fortresses and valleys. Once a kingdom of refuge, trade, and culture, Cilicia now faces its greatest trial. Centuries of resilience, battles, and alliances are about to be tested by a relentless tide of conquest. The fall of Cilicia is not a single moment, but a slow erosion of power, faith, and independence, marking the end of Armenia's medieval kingdom in exile, though the kingdom rose in defiance. Built on the courage of refugees and the faith of centuries, the forces arrayed against it were formidable. Mamluks, Mongols, and later Turkmen and Ottoman factions converged with the determination to erase Armenian sovereignty from the Mediterranean shore. The pressure of the Mamluks. The late 13th century, the Mamluks of Egypt became the greatest threat to Cilicia. Their armies moved with speed and ruthlessness, striking fortified cities and villages alike. Ani's memory of sieges in the highlands now repeated in the south. As Cilician fortresses faced the fire of relentless attackers, the Armenians fought bravely, using the natural defenses of cliffs and rivers, and fortifying their castles with lessons learned over generations. Yet the Mamluks were relentless, their siege engines powerful, their strategy unyielding. Cities burned, trade routes were disrupted, and the people of Cilicia faced famine, disease, and despair. Internal strife and fragmentation. The kingdom's greatest enemies were not only external. Internal divisions weakened Cilicia at crucial moments. Rival noble families disputed succession, local lords resisted royal authority, and factions within the royal court sought foreign alliances that undermined unity. Even alliances with crusaders could not fully stabilize the kingdom. Western knights often pursued their own interests, leaving Armenian kings isolated at times of critical need. The cohesion that had defined Bagratid Armenia and early Cilicia began to fray. Economic decline, once the lifeblood of Cilicia, faltered under constant threat. Ports were raided, caravans intercepted, and mercantile connections to Venice and Genoa became perilous. Wealth, the foundation of cultural and military strength, eroded under siege and political instability. With dwindling resources, fortresses could not be maintained, armies could not be paid, and the people endured increasing hardship. Yet even as the economy faltered, the Armenian spirit persisted. Monks continued to copy manuscripts, priests continued to teach, and communities maintained faith in the cross. Despite the shadow of defeat, the fall of the fortresses in 1375, the final blow came. The Mamluks laid siege to Sis, the royal capital. The walls that had withstood centuries of battle finally succumbed to relentless assault. The city fell, the royal family was captured or killed, and Cilicia ceased to exist as an independent kingdom. Other fortresses fell in sequence. Kakov, Anazarbis, and countless smaller strongholds were abandoned, burned, or occupied. The kingdom that had risen from exile was extinguished, leaving behind only ruins, memories, and the indomitable spirit of its people. Survival beyond the fall. Though the kingdom was gone, Cilicia's legacy endured. Manuscripts, churches, and traditions carried the memory of Armenian rule into exile. Armenian merchants, priests, and scholars scattered across the Mediterranean and the Levant, preserving culture in distant lands. The fall of Cilicia was not the end of Armenian identity. It was a transformation. The people of Armenia learned that sovereignty could be lost, yet faith, culture, and memory could survive. The lessons of Cilicia resilience, adaptation, and courage would echo for centuries to come. The end of an era. The fall of Cilicia marked the end of medieval Armenian political power in the region. It closed the chapter on kings, fortresses, and alliances that had defined centuries of exile and survival. Yet it also solidified the enduring elements of Armenian identity: the apostolic church, the language, the manuscripts, and the spirit of a people who refused to vanish, even in defeat. The Armenians preserved what empires could not destroy: Cilicia. Memory became a symbol of endurance, a reminder that even lost kingdoms leave legacies that outlive walls, armies, and crowns. Closing reflections. Night blankets the ruins of Sis and the surrounding fortresses. Once a thriving kingdom of merchants, warriors, and priests, Cilicia now lies in silence. Yet within that silence remains defiance. The fall of Cilicia was not the end of Armenia. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one written in exile, carried across continents, and preserved in faith. The mountains, rivers, and stones remember. The Armenian spirit endures. The kingdom may be gone, but its memory lives forever. A testament to resilience, courage, and the eternal heartbeat of a people who refused to disappear. Chapter 19. Survival in Shadows. The fall of Cilicia marked not the end, but a transformation of Armenian history. Castles were lost, kingdoms disappeared, and kings vanished from the land. Yet the Armenian people endured. They became shadows in the lands they had once ruled openly, surviving through faith, culture, and unyielding spirit. Survival in shadows is not a tale of glory. It is a tale of quiet resilience, of hidden monasteries, of clandestine schools, of families preserving their language and traditions against the tides of history. It is a testament to a people who refused to vanish, even when the world seemed determined to erase them. Exile and diaspora. After the fall of Cilicia, Armenians dispersed across the Middle East, the Mediterranean, and beyond. Some fled to the mountains of the Caucasus, others to Syria, Lebanon, and Anatolia. Merchants carried not only goods but also language, faith, and memory. creating Armenian enclaves in foreign lands. In exile, Armenians were outsiders, often persecuted, sometimes oppressed, yet they maintained their identity, teaching children the alphabet of Mesrop Mashtats, celebrating the rites of the Apostolic Church, and recounting tales of kings, warriors, and martyrs. Memory became their homeland, and faith became their fortress. Monasteries of refuge. Even in shadow, faith endured. Monasteries hidden in mountains, valleys, and forests became sanctuaries for priests, monks, and scholars. Here, manuscripts were copied by candlelight, histories were chronicled, and prayers whispered into the night. These monasteries were more than religious centers. They were schools, libraries, and centers of cultural preservation. They maintained Armenian traditions when kingdoms had fallen, ensuring that identity survived even in the absence of political power. Under foreign rule, Armenians often lived under foreign dominions, Ottoman, Persian, and later Russian. Their autonomy was limited, their movements controlled, and their communities vulnerable. Yet survival demanded adaptation. Armenians became merchants, artisans, and diplomats. They learned foreign languages while preserving their own. They formed communities in cities, built churches, and ensured the continuity of education. Every act of cultural preservation was an act of resistance. Language and literature. The Armenian language became the lifeline of identity. Texts copied by hand, poetry composed in secret, prayers spoken quietly in homes and churches. These kept memory alive. Literature reflected both sorrow and hope. Chroniclers wrote of lost kingdoms, martyrs, and heroes. Poets sang of mountains left behind and rivers no longer crossed. Even in shadow, the Armenian spirit was vibrant, resisting erasure through the power of words. Faith as strength. The Apostolic Church remained central. Priests and monks acted as guides, educators, and moral anchors. Religious festivals, rituals, and ceremonies gave the scattered Armenian communities cohesion. Faith was a shield against despair. It offered meaning in hardship and continuity in exile. It transformed shadows into sanctuaries, reminding Armenians that their identity was eternal, even when their lands were lost. Trade and diplomacy. Exile also demanded cleverness. Armenian merchants traveled far, connecting Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. They became intermediaries, diplomats, and cultural ambassadors. Trade networks allowed Armenians to survive economically, while diplomacy offered protection in uncertain political landscapes. Even in shadows, Armenians shaped the world around them, ensuring that their communities would endure. Resilience through generation. Survival was not for a single lifetime. Each generation bore the burden of memory, teaching the next the language, faith, and stories of a lost homeland. Children learned of Ani, Cilicia, and Highland Armenia through tales whispered at night. Families maintained traditions, clothing, music, and rituals as acts of quiet defiance. The shadow of exile could not extinguish the flame of identity. It only tested its endurance, strengthening it through hardship, sorrow, and determination. Closing. Reflections. Night falls over the mountains of Armenia and the scattered cities of the diaspora. Candles flicker in hidden churches, manuscripts lie open in monasteries, and families whisper stories of kings and martyrs. Armenians survived not through kingdoms, but through memory, not through armies, but through faith, not through conquest, but through perseverance. Survival in shadows is the story of Armenia itself, quiet, enduring, and eternal. The kingdoms may fall, the castles may crumble, and the invaders may come and go, but the Armenian spirit remains unseen yet unbroken, living forever in shadow and light. Chapter 20. The Eternal Mountain. Ararat rises above the horizon like a sentinel of eternity. Its snow-capped peaks piercing the sky, shrouded in clouds, yet visible for miles across the Armenian plains. For centuries, This mountain has watched over a land scarred by conquest, exile, and struggle. It has witnessed kings rise and fall, kingdoms flourish and collapse, and people endure against impossible odds. It is not merely a mountain. It is the heartbeat of Armenia, eternal and unyielding. The story of Armenia is inseparable from the story of Ararat. Here, history, faith, and identity converge. Here, the nation's memory finds its highest expression. In the silence of its slopes, one can hear the whispers of the past, the lives of kings, monks, warriors, and exiles. The symbol of identity Ararat is more than a mountain. It is a symbol of Armenian endurance, hope, and unity. Through centuries of invasions by Persians, Arabs, Turks, Mongols, and others, the people of Armenia have looked to Ararat as a constant presence. Even when political sovereignty was lost, the mountain remained. It was a reminder that Armenia itself could never be fully conquered. No fortress, no army, no empire could erase the soul of a nation so deeply rooted in its land and faith. Witness to history from the time of Urartu, the first known Armenian kingdom, to the Bagratid Renaissance, and through the exile of Cilicia, Ararat has been a silent observer. Its slopes have sheltered refugees, monasteries, and travelers. Its peaks have overlooked battles, marches, and migrations. Ararat has seen empires clash at its feet, armies trample villages. And yet, like Armenia itself, it has endured. It is a testament to permanence in a world defined by impermanence, faith. And the mountain, the Armenian Apostolic Church, has long associated Ararat with divine presence. Legends tell of Noah's Ark resting upon its summit after the Great Flood, linking the mountain to beginnings, survival, and promise. For generations, Armenians have prayed with Ararat in sight, finding solace in its permanence. It became a spiritual anchor, reminding people that despite hardship, the divine watches over them, and the nation's spirit can never be extinguished. The mountain, in exile even, when Armenians were dispersed across the Middle East, Europe, and beyond, Ararat remained a symbol of home. Families in exile would tell children stories of the great mountain, of the valleys and rivers of their ancestors, and of kingdoms long gone. Through memory, art, and song, Ararat traveled with them. It became not only a geographical landmark, but a spiritual and cultural compass. Wherever Armenians settled, the image of the eternal mountain sustained them. Culture and legacy Ararat has inspired art, literature, and architecture. It appears in manuscripts, illuminated with gold and ink. It rises in carvings upon churches and cockcards. Poets write of its majesty and endurance, while musicians and storytellers embed its presence in every tale. The mountain embodies the essence of Armenia, enduring, proud, and eternal. It is a symbol that transcends borders and centuries, uniting all Armenians through a shared reverence for their homeland. Endurance through time. Empires have come and gone. Kingdoms have risen and fallen. Cities have been destroyed and rebuilt. Yet Ararat remains timeless. Its permanence mirrors the survival of the Armenian people. Even through exile, genocide, and oppression, Armenians have endured. They carry the mountain in their hearts, in their faith, and in their memory. It is a reminder that though history may scar, it cannot destroy the core of identity. Closing reflections. Night falls upon the slopes of Ararat. Clouds drift across its peaks, moonlight glimmers on its snow, and the wind whispers through the valleys. Below, silence dominates, yet within that silence is a story of kings and warriors, of monks and merchants, of exiles and refugees. Armenia is not only a land of mountains and valleys, it is a nation of resilience, preserved in memory, faith, and culture. Ararat watches over it all, eternal and unbroken. A reminder that some things, some identities, cannot be erased. As the stars emerge above its summit, one truth remains. The mountain endures, and through it, so does Armenia. Its story, carried through time, will continue to echo across generations, a testament to survival, faith, and the eternal spirit of a people.